So I'm going to talk to you about the effects of marijuana use in the newborn infant and the baby. This is going to be a relatively short talk, even for me. I saw Dr. Dalkey's talk, and he covered a whole lot of other demographic and information of that sort, so I don't need to go into it, about how much marijuana is being used and where it's all legalized and all that sort of stuff, because he gave all that information. But I will talk about a few things that go back, some not specific to marijuana, but conceptually, that I think are important to keep in mind when we're talking about this and other topics of, drug use, recreational drug use when women are pregnant and the effect it has on the baby. So, next slide. Okay, common drugs of abuse: opiates, tobacco, nicotine, cannabis, which is our topic today, alcohol, cocaine, and methamphetamine. And we're going to focus on the cannabis today. This is a slide of the opioid epidemic in the United States. It's a county-by-county demographic. It really isn't exactly what we're talking about, but I think the thing that's important to pay attention to is in 2003, these are the high incidence death rate from opiate overdoses. Here and in here, a little there, nothing here in the middle. The darker the color, the more there is. And if you go from 2003 all the way through, year by year, county, this is every single county in the United States. You can see how the dark oranges are growing on the coasts. It's really going super strong as we get into the teens here. And you can see that it's all closing in around this middle part of the United States where we happen to be, the sort of central part of the plain states. It's all over. It's just absolutely crazy by 2014. I mean, that's just out of control. And we're here. And when asked about this when I give another talk, I think we're going to be spared a lot of this stuff here because we're aware of it now, and things are being done at many levels to prevent it. But the reason I'm still using this slide is because there seems to be this perception that recreational drug use is okay. And if you're comparing it to drinking alcohol, I guess, yeah, it is fine. But when you're pregnant, it's not. Pregnant women, let me backtrack a little bit. I went to a talk several months ago, and the speaker said, I'm going to give you the conclusion first. And that way, if anybody needs to leave, they got the final answer, right? So the conclusion is you should not use drugs during your pregnancy of any sort, if at all possible. If a mother needs to take medication or drugs during their pregnancy, one needs to consider all the risks and the benefits. And a lot of our mothers, especially in the high-risk population, clearly need to be on medications because some of them are very, very ill. And so we make that decision based on how sick the mom is and what's the benefit to the mom, the benefit to the baby by treating the mom against the potential harm to the infant. Recreational drugs have no benefit. It's recreational. So we need to be clear about that. Now, a lot of people want to hide behind the recreational use of marijuana for alleged medicinal reasons. There are lots of medicinal drugs that we actually have some good science on about their safety in women who are pregnant and the effect on the fetus. But at the end of the day, unless a woman really needs to take a medication or a drug, it's the same thing, they shouldn't do it when they're pregnant. The human fetuses should not be exposed to those things. So that's the answer. The effect is bad, and you shouldn't be smoking marijuana when you're pregnant. Any questions? Anybody want to go home now? All right, I tried. All right. So now we'll get to the rest of it. We'll get back to that point. It wasn't so hard. Everybody knows this stuff, right? And this is not rocket science. I did forget my book. Oh, well, okay. So I always start these talks with these slides. This is an adult brain. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's the most amazing computer in the world. All those little sulci and gyri, there's a bazillion neurons in there, synaptic, connecting to each other, transmitting impulses back and forth, and allowing us to do all the things that we do. There still is not a computer that works as well as we do. They can do certain mathematical computations faster than us, but they can't imagine like we can. They cannot create from nothing like we can. So, this is an amazing machine here, our brain. That's a 36-week brain, many of the same sulci and gyri. There are actually more neurons in the newborn baby's brain when they're first born than there is in this adult brain. During the first few years of life, we prune away a lot of the synaptic connections. We get rid of a few neurons. As we get older, like me, my MRI is not nearly as nooked and cranny as this. It starts to get smooth, a little atrophy, but that's okay. I'm still making it. I take my boards every 10 years. I pass. I don't know how, but I'm passing it. So, 36-week brain, not quite as convoluted. 32-week brain, clearly much more smoother than that 36-week brain. I mean, even if you look specifically like this area here, and just in general, I mean, there's obviously a difference between those two brains, you know, and that's just a month apart. You know, that's just amazing, the difference in what that brain is going to go through from here through the next 4 weeks to get to that. And so in the neonatal ICU, which I prefer to call the neurologic ICU, because everything we do is about supporting brain development, that is really the goal, whether it's being on a ventilator to provide oxygen or blood pressure medication or nutrition to feed the baby, you know, all of that stuff is really to support this brain growth. We're going to go back. It's a 22-week premature baby brain. That's where we start. We don't resuscitate before 22 weeks because they do not survive. Oops, what did I do? We are discouraging about 22-week gestation because the survival rates are so dismal and the outcomes are so poor. 23 weeks, we are willing to do it if the parents really insist, just like at 22 weeks. 24 weeks, it's still a parental decision. After 25 weeks, we always resuscitate, unless it's clear the baby is a non-survivor. But look at that brain. What's going to happen in just 10 weeks from that, if I can go backwards to that? That's astounding. You know, it's just fascinating. But the thing that's important to remember about all this stuff, and eventually I'll get to the real topic at hand, but I think this is the topic, is that in order for this, how do I keep doing that? In order for this brain to go from there to there, there's a whole lot of neuronal generation. You're growing and making neurons. There's a ton of neuronal migration. You don't get all these nooks and crannies, all this curvature, all this stuff to happen from that without neurons moving from one place to another, making connections, forming tracks. I think I'm causing this thing to slide, and that's the mouse doing that to me. Otherwise, I'm having more Parkinson's symptoms than I thought. But it's important to understand that those neurons are moving in a predetermined way because of the DNA, the chromosomes. It's programmed in your DNA how that brain gets developed. And all of ours follow a similar pattern. You know, at some point there's some differences. You know, certainly there's the Mars and Venus difference that goes on, but then there's the other capabilities we have. But the fundamental structure of the brain and all of its complexity is driven by our chromosomes and our genes and our DNA. And if you do things to disrupt that, it doesn't happen. They don't turn out normal. So giving birth to a little 22, 23-week premature baby that has a head bleed, and you're going to put a hole in some of that brain tissue. One, there are neurons there that can't divide, multiply, and grow out and connect and reach the world. Two, you've got a hole when another set of neurons are trying to migrate from point A to point B. They can't get through. There's a hole there. It's blocked. And so injuries to the brain become really devastating. They become multiplied exponentially when you start injuring that brain. And if we go back to the idea of the things that influence it, you got to start thinking about the environment, and that includes all the medications. Sure, the nutrition's good. We all get the nutrition. That's a given. We're here. We're going to do breast milk. We're going to feed the brain all the proper food and all that stuff. But everything else the baby's exposed to, whether it's inhaled air pollution or other toxins or medications we're taking, it really can disrupt that. And the thing I want to talk about, okay, now it won't move for me, is plasticity. Plasticity refers to the ability of the brain to persistently change its structure and function according to its genetic code in response to the environment. That's sort of complicated. There we go. The brain is shaped by the environment it experiences. Gene expression is influenced by the environment it experiences. So you got to think about what you're exposing the baby's brain to, including smoking marijuana or eating marijuana if you prefer to eat, not so. Why does anybody want to smoke? I don't get that. Human lungs were not designed to inhale smoke. Firemen don't want to inhale smoke. Why do people want to inhale smoke? Whether it's tobacco or marijuana, your lungs aren't really designed to inhale heat. You know, if you're going to use it, why not just eat? Huh. I don't take intoxicants. I don't believe intoxicants. I'm that kind of guy, but all right. So the long-term impact of maternal substance abuse on babies, we have the in utero effects, we have the environmental effects, family structure, and socioeconomic. We'll get to all that. In utero effects, we have maternal health, the comorbidities, what mom's other conditions are, and the complications of the pregnancy, whether she's got asthma or heart disease or renal disease from her diabetes, you know, her mental health issues, then the other pregnancy complications. Does she have PIH? You know, does she have preterm labor? You know, does she have, you know, an evolving abruption? Things of that sort. You know, how sick she is, how welcoming the uterus is. Does she have a septum in the middle that's going to inhibit fetal growth and cause premature labor and other deformations? Toxic metabolites, and then things that alter gene expression. There's another point I'm going to get to. And then, of course, there's the home environment. I'm going to skip that. And then we talk about neonatal abstinence. I'm looking for a slide. I forgot where it showed up. I'm hoping it's still there. All right. So I'm going to go back here for a second because I dropped a slide on you. I missed it. So we're talking about plasticity. So the other thing, do I have my teratogen slide? Because the one thing I want to discuss with you all is the concept of teratogens, things that cause birth defects. Now, the most famous teratogen that we all know about is thalidomide. It was a drug given to women in the 50s, mostly to help morning sickness. It was mostly marketed out of Europe by a German pharmaceutical company. It never really got to the United States except for very small, actually I don't think it got to, except for very small numbers. Fortunately, there was a woman physician who was at the FDA in charge of new medications who kind of scratched her head and says, I don't think we have enough information from the drug company here. But the drug had been released in Europe about 10 years before, and there were already reports about babies having significant birth defects. And the most famous ones were something called phocomelia, where the limbs didn't develop. They ended up with small little flipper-type arms or flipper-type legs. And there's a large number of these kids throughout the world, mostly Europe and some in Africa, a little in Central America, because of the effect. And it was clear that it was causing the birth defects. It got stopped, never got to the United States. We were spared and lucky. We had a wonderful FDA intervention there. Saved a lot of heartache here. But the question is why did it cause the defect? And it took a long time, but it wasn't until just a few years ago that they finally figured out exactly why thalidomide actually caused birth defects. And it was altering gene expression is what it was doing, which gets back to my point. I have one. So taking this medication with the intent of treating moms with morning sickness and helping them sleep, when in fact what it was doing was altering gene expressions and interfering with the vascular bud development, because you can't grow a limb unless you got a blood vessel going with it. And so by blunting turning off the genes that allow the blood vessels to grow, the limb didn't grow, or the limb grew, but it grew in a very deformed way. And so no one would have thought of that as a gene expression issue. At first we think of teratogens as just simply a toxic thing like taking arsenic or cyanide. You know, you take the little cyanide capsule when you're a spy and you die instantly. They can't question you. Cyanide gets in the way of cellular respiration, so your cells can't use oxygen. It jumps on all the spots where oxygen is supposed to go. You can try and breathe all you want, but the oxygen never gets in the cell. It doesn't work. That's just a simple pure toxin thing. These drugs, thalidomide and other drugs, what I'm going to mention in a minute, we'll hear about, will alter gene expression. And when you start altering gene expression, you change the brain and how it functions, because it does go up in the brain. We all know it goes to the brain because everyone's taken it for the brain effect. Makes you feel happy, goofy, and relaxed and mellow, and gives you the munchies. All that is the effect it has on your brain, right? Isn't that why everyone's, I don't smoke dope. Okay, but you got to think about these drugs as to how it's affecting gene expression. And then you go back to looking at that brain and realize, oh my goodness, what am I doing to that brain? So plasticity, the brain is shaped by the environment that it experiences, and gene expression is influenced by the environment. So long-term impact, we have to look at a lot of different things: the in utero effect of the drugs, the environment, family structure, socioeconomic structure. A lot of people use a lot of drugs for different reasons. Some of them are from very normal, intact homes, whatever you want to define an intact home, with the parents who are capable for providing and don't have other issues. There are a lot of families that have lots of other strains and issues. Single women that don't have income, that can't support themselves, that are doing desperate things in order to provide for themselves, let alone the child they're going to have or other children they may have. So you got to think about those sorts of experiences that the fetus is going to have and the impact. So we get to hostile environment, altered gene expression. Those are what I was talking about. And then the home environment, the effect that has. We know that a lot of the long-term impact of brain development is the genetics, but it's also not just simply nature, genetics, it's also nurture, the environment that the kid is in and the effect it has. So when babies are born, they go through a process of maladaptation or withdrawal, depending on the medication they're on. If you're on an opiate, you're going to have more of a classic withdrawal symptom. If you're on an SSRI, you're going to have a maladaptation. Babies whose mothers are using marijuana do have some adaptation. They tend to be sleepier. They don't feed as well. They're more lethargic, just like people that are smoking marijuana. So you got to think about those sorts of things. So on some of those kids, we could do a neonatal abstinence score. It isn't very useful when you're looking at babes whose moms are using a lot of marijuana. So this isn't necessarily the best way. Now we can look at all these features. We've all used the Finnegan scoring system to try and decide how symptomatic the baby is. And if you're low, then you use non-pharmacologic. If your score is high, you can start using medications, different ones that we have here to use. But this doesn't work so well when moms are using marijuana. If they're using polydrugs, then that's another story. Finnegan scoring sheet. I misappropriated this from a group in Australia, and they put geckos on their scoring sheets. It's a little cute thing they do. So another way to better assess babies, and this is another scoring tool that's been developed from the group at Yale, New Haven Children's Hospital, called Eat, Sleep, and Console, as an alternative to the Finnegan neonatal abstinence scoring system. It looks at slightly different parameters. I won't go through all the little study, but basically what they did is they took a bunch of kids and they did their Eat, Sleep, Console assessment on them, and based on that, they treated the babies as they thought they needed to be treated with medications. They simultaneously did a Finnegan scoring and found that by using Eat, Sleep, Console, they were able to use few of them needed treatment, and those that did get treatment needed less drug and consequently got out of the hospital sooner. And they had no rebounds. They had no kids go home and come back because they missed anybody. And for marijuana use, this may be a better, more effective tool than Finnegan scoring. So as I've said in a couple other lectures, we're still looking at using this, still trying to figure out how to implement it, trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing by using it and not dumping a scoring tool that's been around for decades, that's been well studied. But, you know, this may be a better way to assess these other children. So, what are the effects specifically of cannabis on the baby? You can have mild withdrawal symptoms, delayed state regulation. In the long term, they can have problems with reading and spelling difficulty, executive function impairment, problem solving, memory, planning, impulsivity, and attention. And this gets back to what I'm talking about. This is not a benign drug that goes in the body and does nothing. It actually has a real effect on the fetus, and the effect it exerts is primarily on the brain's growth and development. Do I want the next slide? Yes. Increased depressive episodes in children who were exposed to cannabis during the pregnancy. Increased use of tobacco and cannabis use. Go figure that. How does that happen? And when you do functional MRIs, you find that there's altered neural functioning. Now, part of the problem when you discuss this, and I wish I brought the book. Nancy got me a book on drug exposure, and I forgot it, because there's a very interesting little story in there. It has to do with an interview. There's a ton of literature published about marijuana use that goes all the way back to the 30s. And the vast majority of the early stuff is just, I'll be professional on film, or on video. It was junk. It was garbage. It was a lot of scare tactics, a lot of silliness. And I grew up in the 70s. There's a lot of nonsense out there about what marijuana does. But the truth is, there's also a bunch of good published science that's been evolving for the last decade or more about the effects of marijuana. And it is unquestionable. There is no denying that it affects brain growth and development and long-term cognitive function. Not necessarily going to make you an idiot. I'm not saying that. But your brain is not going to work as it should. You're going to see changes in these sorts of functions. And the thing that most people fail to appreciate in the debate when you're discussing this is an adult brain that's fully myelinated is going to have a different long-term reaction to marijuana than a premature or a newborn brain that is marginally myelinated. And that's the thing you got to understand. Our brains are all fully grown and developed. The neurons have migrated, the synapses have been made, we've got the brain we've got. It's going to be much more resilient and resistant to impact than that newborn baby brain will be. And so you've got to think about it in that sense. Unfortunately, people don't want to, because they still want to get behind it's recreational, it's harmless, it's natural. It's natural. Tobacco's natural. Been grown in America since Christopher Columbus Day, before Christopher Columbus. It's natural, but it is not good for you. Arsenic is natural. Hemlock is natural. Socrates took hemlock. That was the end of Socrates, you know. I mean, there are a lot of natural things that are not good for you. So if you talk about tobacco, nicotine is just one of 4,000 compounds in cigarettes. The number of different chemicals in marijuana has not been fully appreciated. The most active one is the delta-9 THC, the tetrahydrocannabinoid, that is the most effective, the most potent hallucinogenic of all the chemicals. But there are other ones, and some of them may in fact have real legitimate medicinal uses that aren't hallucinogenic, that may in fact are the things that make it a good antiemetic. And if you can distill out all the hallucinogenic stuff and get to the antiemetic, it might be a really good drug. But we don't really know that well yet because we haven't studied it, that particular chemical for marijuana, its effect on brain development as a whole. So again, there's still tons of information we don't know about it. And so, yeah, we need a lot more medical research on marijuana and all the different components before we start saying, yeah, it's really a good and safe thing to do. 4,000 different components in a cigarette. Who would have thought that? Now, some of these are things the cigarette companies adds in there to help make you stay addicted and things like that to it. But nonetheless, tobacco has all these other effects. We see similar things with smoking. I don't want to focus on that so much. We're going to skip past all that stuff. Okay, so maternal interventions. I want to go back for a second. The other thing is, the discussion is that focuses on if the mother's taking it, how much is the baby exposed to? The fact is that marijuana will move from the mom to the breast milk readily, but it does not move from the breast milk back to the mother so easily. And so the babies can be exposed to much more marijuana than you think. For a lot of medications, we have moms do what's called pump and dump. Take your medication you need, and then pump your milk, and then don't use that, dump it. I know it's sacrilege, but sometimes you got to dump your breast milk, okay? And then the next time you go to feed the baby, the levels will be low enough that there'll be a lower concentration of the breast milk and it'll be safer. It doesn't work that way with marijuana because it concentrates in the breast milk, it doesn't move back, okay? So you have to be careful about that. The baby has a lot of fat. They store the marijuana. They don't clear it nearly as quickly as adults will. So you got to think about that as well. Wait a second. Okay, we're not there yet. So the interview that I wanted to read that Dr. Dalkey talked about, interviewing parents, moms about using marijuana, from the booklet that I was looking through, the mother was asked, does she use marijuana? And she said yes. And they asked if she had thought about it, is it safe? And she goes, oh, yes, I think it's safe. It's natural. And he goes, have you thought about it transferring the breast milk? And the mother replied essentially, yeah, she did, but she thought it was safe for the baby. And he said, the interviewer said, well, are you worried that it can cause these effects? And she goes, I don't believe that. And then he brought up some other contraindications, some other complications. She goes, well, I don't believe that. I think it's natural and it's safe. And so she took a very slanted, biased view. And a lot of people will take that view. But in fact, it is a bad drug to use. In Colorado, where it's legal to obtain marijuana now, recreational, I mean, the presence of marijuana in the baby's urine is going to get you reported to CPS as a child abuse criteria. They're very, very strict about, the people using marijuana during pregnancy, because it is not so safe. But people have this perception that I think is mostly driven out of their own private desire that they want to use the drug. Some of it's naivete, but it's not so safe. It's not any safer than drinking alcohol during the pregnancy. And so you got to be very thoughtful and careful about the drugs you take when you're pregnant. So the maternal interventions, of course, we're going to do prenatal screening. We want to educate them on the risks. A lot of people truly are naive and they don't get it. And if they would actually read or be educated by the healthcare providers, they would take a different view of this stuff. So it's always education, not judgment. I presume they just don't understand, that it really can be dangerous. And when explained to them, they'll take a different view. And a lot of women will embrace this. They're kind of go, oh, really? Because on the blog, it's like, well, the blog's not science. Somewhere I've ordered this T-shirt I saw online that says, my medical degree is smarter than your Google search, Come on. Yeah. All right. If they have to, a lot of people use a lot of recreational drugs really because they're trying to self-medicate, whether that's alcohol or marijuana. And they have mental health issues and they're trying to self-medicate for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are social dramas that are going on in their life. Some of them are physical ailments. But you have to think about, what's going on and what's going on with their mental health and trying to address those issues. And then, of course, there's treating the substance abuse. Because 16% of chronic marijuana users will develop a physical addiction. Back in the 70s, they used to teach us, back when I was in high school, that you couldn't get physically addicted to marijuana. It was only habitual. You just got in the habit. When, in fact, that's not true. You actually can become physically addicted to the drug. All right, so child intervention, child protective service referral if any baby positive for marijuana. But here's where things get out of sync again. I studied my residency here in Omaha, Midwest, conservative state. It was the 80s. I went to Houston, Texas, a big, sprawling city with all sorts of stuff going on. And then from there, I went to Philadelphia, a whole nother ball of wax. Kid tested positive for marijuana in the urine, called up CPS, and the person on the phone said, "Is the mama beating the baby?" And I went, "No." Well, that was Houston mama. No one called him mama. "Is the mother beating the baby?" "No." "Is the mother doing anything else to immediately harm the baby?" "No." And their CPS worker said, "Why are you calling us then? Call us if it's serious." Because back in 1993, we didn't really think much about marijuana being a serious drug problem. And again, a lot of this science is newer and more accurate than it used to be. Philadelphia also had a whole lot of other problems going on. CPS will generally get involved if mom is breastfeeding. So the position is, if mom is going to continue to use marijuana after the baby's born, we do not want her to breastfeed the baby. If the mother has only used rarely or occasionally, we'll counsel her about not using marijuana anymore, and then it would be reasonable for her to continue breastfeeding the baby. But if she's adamant that she wants to breastfeed, then our position needs to be, then you really should not be breastfeeding your baby if you're going to continue smoking marijuana. I might have said that backwards. Let me say it again. If the mother's adamant she's going to continue to use marijuana after the baby's born, we need to counsel her and advise her she should not be breastfeeding the baby, and that, yes, a formula would be a better alternative than breast milk laced with marijuana. Okay? Where else am I? Okay. Find out how long she's been using, the history, other issues, and then CPS can do their evaluation. So, maternal symptoms, there's a whole bunch here. Mostly we're going to talk about the marijuana. Boy, that's blurry even for me. I got to get new bifocals. Relaxation, talkative, lowered inhibition, loss of concentration. This is all in your handout, so I think you can read it there. Overdose, fatigue, paranoia, delusions, symptoms of withdrawal, nonspecific symptoms, loss of appetite, resistance. So this is a list of all the different things that we can talk about, but that's what we're going to look for. Newborn, higher incidence of tremors, altered visual responses. Disrupts, as I said, we're getting towards the end here. Disrupts normal brain development, disrupts function, interferes with synaptogenesis and neural connections. Again, remember that. Picture that 22-week brain, how smooth it was, and then you're going to get to that 36-week brain with all those nooks and crannies that have developed and all those synaptic connections, and you're going to be interfering with those connections and the talking of the neurons to each other, and that's a big deal, and affects different specific ranges as well as white matter volume. It does really change the brain of the baby. So, sustained attention. There's enough ADHD out there in the world already. With our smartphones, we can only watch something for 30 seconds, then we all lose attention. We don't need to add to that. Visual spatial function, some hyperactivity, problem solving. I mean, and these are not trivial. I mean, I was intrigued to be reminded when my daughter started school by the idea that if you can't read by third grade, you are going to be so far behind in your education. Because after third grade, education is all about reading. So if you can't read, you cannot keep up, and you're going to just fall behind every single day. So you got to be able to do some basic reading by third grade. Well, if you're having problems with sustained attention and problem solving, you are not going to be able to get through school. And if you're going to start kindergarten already impaired in these abilities, it's going to be a big problem for the rest of your life as you go through school. And that's different than someone who is 40 or 20, who has a more mature brain, who is getting wasted on a weekend and going back to work on Monday. You need to specialize or develop specific individual therapies. A lot of it's speech and language, some of it's occupational, some of it's behavioral, how to deal with the ADHD and the attention. The earlier you intervene, the better to modify the behaviors. And of course, you need to have ongoing cognitive behavioral assessments to see how the baby's doing. And this is the hardest part about all these babies who are born to addiction. Back in the 80s, the big deal was cocaine, and there's this whole concept of this lost generation of babies, crack babies that were born, and they were hopeless, nothing you could do. Well, there was nothing further from the truth. There's a lot you can do to babies who were born to mothers who abused cocaine, just like there's a lot you can do to help babes who are born to moms who are using marijuana. But it takes a sustained intervention, not just once or twice, but all the way through their schooling. You've got to continue to reassess how they're doing, how they're progressing, and make adjustments to the care plan. Oh, that's medical, isn't it? To their education plan along the way to work on the things where they're having problems. And it can't just be once. It's got to be all the way through school. All right, so roles of the nurse. The doctor will order the drug screening. At our hospital, we do urine and meconium. Other institutions will do umbilical cord screening. Some will do hair sampling. I don't think those add a whole lot of sensitivity or specificity to what we're trying to achieve here, so we don't routinely do them. They are certainly more expensive. Sometimes there will be an indication, but as a rule, I don't think sending cord off all the time tells me anything I don't know from meconium or from urine. Urine is good for about a week or two, maybe that long, maybe less than a week. Meconium is good from the second trimester on. So if mom is regularly smoking marijuana or exposed to it, I know the story. You know, I wasn't smoking, everyone else in the room was smoking. Yeah, okay, you're still smoking it. I mean, secondhand smoke's real, right? There's a lot of people with cancer from the lungs because of secondhand smoke. So we do urine and meconium here. You guys get, the nurses get to collect it. We'll notify CPS. We'll talk and educate the family about effects. And then, of course, we want to direct mom to community resources so that she can get whatever intervention support help she needs to not smoke. All right, and these are a list of references. You have all that stuff. So the main upshot was, again, we need to think about drug exposure and the concept of teratogens slightly different than we have in the past. It isn't really just about a specific toxic metabolite as much as it is about altering gene function and gene expression. And when you've got, I should have had my slides in there, sorry. When you've got that 22-week brain, that 32-week brain, where you have all that neuronal migration going on, which is all really about gene expression, genes turning on and off in a pre-programmed manner, you know, and then you disrupt that by exposing them to a drug of any sort, you know, there are going to be consequences to that. And if there are certain risks to mom that you've got to take the chance, then you do that. We know that antenatal steroids are vital for helping moms in preterm labor and helping those babies if they deliver early. But we also know that excessive exposure to antenatal steroids can be harmful to that fetal brain as well. So we're very thoughtful about the doses and how much steroid we give those moms. We don't just give them tons. Back in my residency days, we gave moms antenatal steroids every month all the way right through until they delivered. We don't do that anymore because that's bad for those little premature brains, those fetal brains. So we have to think about the drugs and the risk-benefit to both parties there. All right, I think I'm going to pause there and stop and answer any questions you all might have. Is anybody still awake? Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming. If you have questions, feel free to ask. You all know where to find me mostly. Otherwise, thank you.